Good morning, Trumptopia. It's another episode of the Almost Daily Zencast with your host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. On today's episode, spiritual toxicity, spiritual trauma. In my humble opinion, dear friends, that is the real virus. That is the real problem at the core of everything. And it's the one thing that we collectively neglect. We're forced to confront it. Life is that. But at the same time, we willingly engage in the avoidance of it. Of dealing with our inner selves and the dark, scary things we might find there, and the beautiful, blinding, healing light we might also find there. It's a frightening thing. Trust me, I understand. It's also an empowering thing, a magical thing, a healing thing, a delightful thing, a beautiful thing to look within, right? To delve inside and behind and before the mind that is the chatterbox of our daily moment-by-moment narrative, and to see what can be seen or experienced or felt or connected to. It's what we strive for. It's what we seek when we call ourselves spiritual seekers. That central place, that place of clarity, that place of connectedness. But as we do what we do, as we seek what we seek, as we advance along our path, the enemy, my friends, the enemy within, the enemy that is ourselves, seems to be a step and a half ahead of us all the time. And for whatever reasons, I drew the short straw. It's my job, it's one of my responsibilities while I live and breathe here on this material plane with you, to be that dick that points out we all have a beam in our eye. Let's not be arguing about the splinter in each other's, right? Like, because that's one of the many things we need to integrate while we're here. What am I talking about? What am I rambling about? Friends, today's episode is not just about a generalization that spiritual toxicity trauma is the real virus. That could be a really empty statement. I back it up with this, friends. In practical terms, in real life out there in the world terms, there seems to be, and I shit you not, I have been passively observing this in, my limited backwater pool of social media intersections that I have access to on the interwebs. But there seems to be an organized and concerted effort to infiltrate and hijack spiritual communities. And those are blunt terms I just used. But if you've been a long-time listener, you might recognize them. I talk about organized religion being hijacked. Not anytime recently, not just since Trump got into office, but centuries ago. And for the purposes of worldwide oppression and the seduction of the human species into the indulgence of a few toxic practices of negligence, if I can cobble together a sentence for you like that. We have been coaxed into neglecting our etheric responsibilities, our spiritual responsibilities, our responsibilities that lay beyond the first thin layers of the multi-layered veil that is Maya, the illusion, the matrix of illusion. I'm not just making that up. If it stands to reason that anyone who claims to be open-minded and willing to investigate new information would be intrigued by the challenge. And curiously, what happens? You bring new information to anybody from any quadrant, never mind which party. You bring spiritual information to anybody who isn't already seeking it. And I'm not making a judgment there. I know that sounds like I just drew a line. But some lines are organic and some lines are engineered. We have to remind ourselves that the world is much subtler and more infinitely complex than we give it credit when we dumb ourselves down and think of it as just a flat, two-dimensional place full of stuff we can commodify and people we can screw over, right? Like, the world is more than that. So I have a question for you, dear listeners, before I spiral out of control, that I mean very seriously. I ask you this without projection, because I'm sharing a concern. Have you stopped to ask yourself, what kind of aware spiritual person are you? Are there different kinds of spiritually aware people? Have you wrestled with that question and its deeper implications? I point to that question because I think it's helpful. It might be confusing to some, perhaps, but confusion is also a beautiful place to get lost and redirect. Find your direction in. Redirect in the direction of finding your true north, right? But it is my humble duty to report to the world that there seems to be a lot, like more than one would expect, given all other things being equal, a lot of self-described, quote, aware, or, quote, woke, or, quote, awakened, or, quote, spiritual, or dare I even say people who self-identify as enlightened, quote unquote, who are also simultaneously busy judging those that they deem as ignorant sheeple. And that it's trendy to be like, look at these dumb sleeping zombies that don't understand blah, 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 because they feel empowered by information that has been brought to their attention by sources that they, for whatever reason, have decided to latch onto, and we are all, one could define the postmodern mythological rat race as that in disguise of productivity, right? This argumentation that we go into ourselves to find, that we go out into the world to find an authority, an authoritative source that will, for, the sake of argument, have the righteous truth on how to define what's going on. Because isn't that what we all need and want? But my warning is that, the darkness knows the path as well as, if not better, than anyone claiming to know the path to enlightenment for the purposes of the light or the good. And that there is such a thing as spiritual toxicity, that there is such a thing as spiritual ego traps, that there is such a thing as plain old ordinary, insidiously seductive cultural ego traps and normative ego traps of the normal and mundane that are spiritually significant because they generate a certain kind of dark or negative energy. And I don't mean in the space, well, maybe it is, in fact, indeed, sort of a sci-fi crossover of physics and spirituality, as they are wont to do anyways. But I sense out there in the in the gestalt of social media, an organized agenda, a very sharp-toothed and seductive attempt to infiltrate spiritual communities and co-opt those ready and subconsciously willing to be co-opted for the purposes of becoming themselves living ego traps, of spewing ego trap at others, to be caught up in an ego trap of judgment, of saying, we are the selected few that are better than the rest of you, and thus are entitled to XYZ, whatever the fuck that is. And that agenda is universal, right? Like, that's how they hijacked religions and made them into oppressive cults. What was once a spiritual practice shared by someone who achieved something called enlightenment through spiritual practice to become an evil empire, quite literally, as we can observe throughout history up until and including the modern day with the state of Myanmar, where Buddhism has somehow become a totalitarian state empire ready and willing to butcher its own citizens for the sake of righteousness. The fuck? It's happening, right? Like, that's stranger than fiction. Who would have written that sci-fi movie? That Buddhists become a bloody, brutal, tyrannical dictatorship that butchers refugees. And continues with a straight face to somehow claim, following the ultimate refugee, Buddha, who taught things that should not lead anyone down the path of butchering others for the sake of empire. I digress. We see the evidence everywhere, friends. And the counter argument, the tough, bitter pill to swallow that anyone who might be being, seduced by these quite pervasive ego traps is the reminder, right, that anyone who is truly in alignment, in deep grace, in awareness, in communion, and this is not a judgment thing, this is not a better than thou argument, but that anyone that is truly spiritually aware is never choosing or engaging in the act of being busy judging others and spewing hate speech at those that they label as whatever negative label they're peddling at people. Like, Jesus wasn't busy actually kicking people in the gut, right? Jesus hung out with lepers and tax collectors and prostitutes and the lowest of the low, the criminality of his culture, and said, I forgive you. You are human too. You deserve not to be objectified. You deserve to be healed and to be healing. And you deserve love and to be loved. And you deserve to be forgiven. And spoke of grace and of practices that connect us to that grace. And all of these things throughout history get hijacked and turned into inverse, opposite, bizarro world, backwards and upside down, toxic versions of themselves. Empire. We can call anything that was ever empire that. We can make the label empire mean that thing. The abuse through hijacking and corruption of what was once something for the greater good that has now become something, toxic and oppressive and self-destructive. And it's happening, especially online in social media, I think. It has been for however long social media's been around. Because, friends, where is the enemy? Where do the bad guys hang out? But deep down inside the cockles of our own hearts. It's a networked thing. It's a distributed thing. It's a we are all in it together thing. It's a we are all mirrors of each other and one another thing, right? But I stand here as someone who's been paying attention a little bit, and I think that we must raise awareness that there is an active engineered, well thought out propaganda campaign that has infiltrated and continues to trend towards infiltrating spiritual communities. And this campaign of seductive ego traps and mental conditioning is all about brainwashing people with self-superiority that is dressed up in the guise of awareness or a wakefulness or an enlightenment. The truly aware do not waste time judging anyone. They do not waste energy spewing hate speech at those who do not see clearly. They do not engage in hate. They do not harbor revenge in their hearts. They do not target others for the willful expression of mental or verbal or emotional or spiritual or physical violence. Period. Not because it's some law that must be followed, but because I think, as Jesus lived a living example of, as Buddha lived a living example of, that once we remember, because it is truly not about being better, but about reconnecting ourselves to reality as it actually is. Not as some story or idea or ideology that we invented in our ignorance describes it as, but as it truly, authentically, alivingly, lividly, in its livingness, presents itself to us, right? And hate is toxic and useless, especially if the goal is healing through forgiveness. And mind you, like, we are all in that place of, shit, I did that. I've done that. I am doing that. I have and will again do that. Because we are all flawed human beings trapped in this, if we want to get all dark and macabre and what's the word? Not Victorian, Gothic about it. We are all sharing this insane experience together, this prison of the mind. It's not about being better. It's about what we focus on, and the evidence is in the actions of what we do, and even in the nuance of how we think and what we choose to believe. And if there is to be a distinction, if we are to use language to define one thing in contrast to another, dare I humbly suggest that the truly aware, quote unquote, those who are truly humbly invested in their own spiritual development and are on their spiritual path and not being sidetracked and distracted by these ego traps that are littered everywhere, they do not do these things that have been identified above because they are fully invested in other efforts, right? And they find those other efforts more valuable. They're truly invested in the spiritual work, which is something none of the people who run around judging others as inferior or as blind or as asleep or as not awake enough or not aware enough or not well researched enough, y'all are missing out on, right? Like, if you're not busy doing the actual spiritual work, what are you busy judging others about their lack of activity for? Because there is indeed, my friends, and I don't mean to sound like I'm peddling something. I'm sharing with you that which I think to be the case. There is indeed spiritual work, deep spiritual work that is messy and ugly and kind of gross and kind of entirely your own private hell and entirely your own private torture chamber of self-working that is, for lack of a better term, not by me or by and I say this about this following word I'm about to use, right? It is required, not by me or any other human dictator or tyranny, but rather by that transcendent source beyond our own language to describe, that is the root origin of this phenomenological field of experience that we call reality. That the universe itself has, for lack of a better term, an agenda. The way we constantly argue about political agenda, we are, in that treadmill of argument over political agenda, radically neglecting the cosmic, organic, spiritual agenda of those beings and that goddess that we call collectively Mother Nature, or life itself. For it exists and operates on levels that we are, practically speaking, blinded to in the default modalities that we operate here on this little place, this little bulb of womb of life-giving that we call planet Earth. And that work that is required because, well, we sort of invoked it on ourselves. We brought it, it's part of the journey. And to avoid it and neglect it is to not engage in the fullness of the whole experience of that which we call, the things that we call it, life, the spiritual path, the things that we aspire to, evolutionary enlightenment, etc. And that, the silver lining here is, folks, that there are many already out, for as many jerkwads on the internet trolling other people for the sick joy of just trolling them and misguiding them into pledging their allegiance to hateful idols and invoking everyone into an addiction of the exact opposite kinds of practices than that we need to be doing. There are untold countless others who are, through their own understanding and their own experience and their own living of their life, getting it, quote unquote. Not in a superiority kind of way. Not in a, we're the chosen few kind of way. But in the seat of my deepest understanding, I've come to understand, that this is the process and that I can engage in it kind of way, if that makes sense. For there is an infinite and endless and ongoing calling throughout the many layers and branches of the fractal matrix, friends. And that is indeed to reintegrate, to return to source, to be busy transmitting healing energy instead of dark, foreboding fear or, brutal crimson red violence, etc. We can be making choices in what we do, even in the non-doing of things, if that makes sense. And thus we are all called to that. We are all called to journey deep within and heal ourselves. We're all called to experience life with robust passion and therefore, come to the aha moments that only that, doing that can bring, right? Like engaging in life in that present moment in that robust way that we are called to do. And those are things that, I don't know, they get to be silly and almost stereotypical, right? Like, we are called to love. We are called to forgive. We are called to feed the hungry and heal the sick. We are called to wrestle with the demons that we find deep down inside ourselves. We are called to keep ourselves busy with forgiveness and healing as we take every painful step along the spiritual journey that brings us closer and closer and closer to the trauma deep within ourselves. That is the trauma that all others share. And why wouldn't you choose? Why wouldn't you choose to be busy with that instead of busy saying X, Y, and Z about people and how dumb they are or how horrible they are. Yeah, horrible people are out there doing ridiculous things. And if you want to help, if you want to change the world, then as many a wise person has said before now, go and be that change. And you can change that word. If you think the world needs healing, go and be that healing. Start with yourself and then move on to others. If you want to be that manifestation of joy and unity, you know, where do you think you can be most effective in achieving that, right? Then deep within yourself. And we must always stand vigilant because it's not something new, right? This isn't something Trump invented. We can't give anybody, any one avatar, too much credit, right? This is an ancient problem that we have lived with lifetime after lifetime after lifetime after lifetime with since however far back you want to go. As I like to say, since we toppled the Tower of Babel, at least that far back. So I invite you humbly to join us, to take a stand, to sit down and meditate. Like the dumbest advice I have to give to anybody, it sounds dumb because people laugh. People are like, that'll do nothing, is the first thing everyone, even so-called spiritual people that I've talked to, that I've met in real life, that I've just had in short, brief, interesting, weird conversations, like, hey, have you just sat down and tried meditating 3 times a day for 90 days? Like for reals. Like you're in boot camp and you're going to take it serious and you're going to do it like, I don't know, like the end of the movie depended on it. You know? And even spiritual people have been like, what the fuck are you talking about? That won't do dick. I'm like, okay, then don't do it. But like, what if, I shit you not, what if that is as important as breathing? And who's going to disagree? Breathing is important. For I feel, my friends, that, the more we have the opportunity to introspect on what we are collectively going through right now, the more it seems clear that there's great big giant glaring writing on the wall, the cosmic wall, and that we must organize and stand/sit together, right? Yoga together, and I mean this in the most benign and platonic and like safe and doing this together separately right now because of conditions and all. But we must manifest deep spiritual healing by engaging in the rediscovery of that which resides deep inside our hearts, which is, a profound journey that we can only sort of help each other recall how to embark upon, to the center of the universe, for lack of a better term. And that we all share that fractal recursive thing in common of every one of our minds, every one of our body avatars is indeed the portal to and from the center of the universe and back to this extreme that is our living flesh and our temporal boundary of experience that we are sucking in. We are here to witness, right? We are here to witness ourselves, one another, and each other in this place we call the world. And maybe, just maybe, this previous normal that we've been chilling with for the last 300 years is toxic AF and dead wrong in terms of how it do, what it do. Like, we shouldn't be doing things that way. Maybe. Just throwing it out there as part of the whole shebang, right? And that's a hard thing to realize, but that the more we commune with reality as it actually is, as it actually presents itself to us through ourselves and each other, the more we understand, not just in scientific terms, but in direct phenomenological terms, the inner and outer dynamic of reality, and the more fully, this cannot be forgotten or neglected either, in terms of forgetting things, the more fully we abdicate all the lies or the half-truths or the fucked up patterns or paradigms or constructs and models and thought obsessions and addictions and bad habits and things we've chosen to believe that keep us preoccupied with radically ignoring the spiritual callings that we are called to in this universe in favor of butchering each other for profit, one way or the other. Knowing that all of life is one, then we are literally butchering one another on all levels. Even the vegetables, are alive and part of us being alive. And we're wasting time arguing about all the different wrong ways we could live in this universe instead of reconnecting and rediscovering and re-embodying and re-manifesting like the much more healthier and truer and in alignment and profoundly beautiful ways that we could be choosing to live in this reality. And that's what the journey is about, period. That roller coaster in and of itself is what we're here to do. And that's why so many of us, especially now in this window of opportunity, for lack of a better term, we feel, so many of us feel calling to speak out in such a, strangely cacophonous myriad of voices. Because as you most certainly must know, dear friends and listeners, I ain't the only one out there talking about shit like this. And I'll leave you with that, dear friends. Check yourself. Who are you? What are you doing? And I don't mean this with judgment. I say this with love and forgiveness and the shining, beautiful, silver light of hope that no matter how dark these times have gotten, keep getting, seem to be continuing to get, the solution is indeed deep within you and everyone, and that we need not argue or fight or win some battle. We need only engage in our own healing. And that lifts everyone up. Thanks for listening, friends. Be wary of the ego traps. They're everywhere. And when you see your own friends and family getting worked up to the point of choosing to spew names instead of just practicing the difficult practice of forgiveness and transmitting healing, because that's it. That's fundamentally speaking, in terms of what hot lesson is really relevant right now that every teacher taught. It's we got to start there. We got to start there and build a new consensus. Never mind this idea of a new normal. I'll leave you with this, folks. Sign off the show with this. Fuck new normal. Oh, and by the way, friends, I think I've come up with a radical way to change something about the way we speak into the world. Fuck is one of those words, right? There's already a plethora of beautiful video art about fuck and what it means and how it can be used and what it can be changed into. But for those who have never had the satisfaction of the curiosity of what the oldest known working definition of it that sort of seems to make sense that comes from ancient empire. I would argue that we've probably had the word since long before this particular historical reference, but it's an interesting, cool one. From way back in the Dark Ages, it meant for unlawful carnal knowledge. And I think we should change it to, for the radical purposes of, like, if words are magic and magics are words, and, like, even if, you know, well, we can argue about how that works and how that doesn't work, and whether other prerequisites are required. And certainly people have very specific opinions about that. But I say, you know, hell, better safe than sorry. If spelling is a form of magic because, you know, we're casting spells, let's officially and for the benefit of all mankind change the definition of the acronym FUCK. And instead of anything to do about fucking, quite literally, let's change it to forgiving unconditional cathartic karma. Boom! I almost forgot it there. I had this thought yesterday. Forgiving unconditionally all cathartic karma, or something along those lines, right? Catharsis karma. I don't know how the phrasing may be a little bit, there's plenty of room to refine it. But, like, in a world, like, if I was, imagine a world 70 years in the future. Trumpopian empire has ruled supreme ever since Ivanka came back after the leftist uprising and really settled things, and boom, established Trumpopian empire. That's the novel book series that I'm totally failing to write, that I've been obsessed with since the day they came down the golden escalator. I should have written this already. They should be on bookshelves. And arguably, in some universe very close by to our own, it is. I just need to merge with that one so that we can just move on in the style I prefer to be moving on with the next round of activity. But I digress. Imagine a world like that where in the underground we're trying to, like, you know, the resistance is trying to figure out, like, how the fuck do we actually fix all this? And one is we got to change all our, you know, toxic habits and try to make them less toxic. Because as The Good Place pointed out, way back in the pre-COVID era, ye olde days, everything, even the good things, are so deeply stuck in the quagmire of all the horrible toxic ways we've made everything toxic, that even, you know, doing beautiful good things is not getting us there. So we've got to radically change everything, right? We've got to completely reinvent the way we do. And this is one tangible way we can start changing it. Changing the word fuck from some horrible, toxic, evil, brutal, mean thing to a symbol for radical, cathartic, karma cleansing, unconditional forgiveness. I don't know. Will it work? Who knows? But yeah, you might as well give it a try. I want to talk about other things, but I'm going to go ahead and end the show right there because I think I've rambled on long enough. As always, friends, thank you and namaste, and may peace, love, and grooviness blossom in your heart. If you haven't yet, go watch Midnight Gospel on Netflix. Do it now. Stop everything. Go watch it.